Welcome to the Middle of Culture. I am one of your co-hosts, Eden.
And I'm your other co-host, Peter.
And I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah, my name is Eden, so deal with it, listeners. It's fine.
Perfect. We love it. It's great. It's awesome.
It's great. I took my birth name, and as my boss said when I told her, I just took my bra off. That's all. Now I'm Eden.
That is kind of amazing.
So that's the joke I've been going with since then. So here we are.
I think that's perfect.
It works for me. Anyway, what have you been up to, Peter?
You know, same stuff as all the time, like going to work. And I will say this, it has been an interesting week. Monday afternoon, I just went kind of storming into my clinic, my practice manager's office, and I turned to her and I said, is it a full moon? It feels like a full moon. We always knew in residency that, like, you knew if you were on call when it was a full moon, just like, forget it. You were going to have to deal with the craziest, weirdest stuff you could possibly imagine. And that was what Monday felt like. Turns out that the full moon was last Tuesday, so I was a week off, but I don't know. Tuesday, same thing. I'm like, holy crap. It is like freaking full moon all over again. Just weird cases, weird patients with weird complaints and referrals where I walked into one person and I just said to him, I said, I literally have no idea what the urologist who was taking care of you up in Spokane was thinking. I cannot make sense of it, but if you want to keep doing it, great. I'll fill those meds and I'll see you in a year, because I just wasn't even going to try and argue with this person. So Fair. It's been one of those weeks where I'm just like, I don't know what's in the water, but whatever it is, it's bad. I don't like it, and I want it to go away. But how have you been doing, Eden?
It's fair. I've been doing pretty great. Things have been busy. Work has been extremely busy for being summer. I have a lot of projects I'm working on, which is fun, but it means that it keeps me busy and I have less time to slack off and read and listen to things and watch things while I'm on the clock. So where's the fun in that?
One of these days, it would be great to maybe briefly, but talk about what are some of the things that you do at work, because I will also admit to a certain degree of ignorance when it comes to what you do working there at the university and stuff. But, you know,
I can give you a quick tour. I think that we'll have a lot to talk about, but I don't think it's going to be very long when we talk about our big thing today.
Yes.
But so I work for the university. I'm an instructional services specialist. So during the school year, that means that I work with a lot of faculty to develop and deploy technology and systems and learning management systems and things in their classes so that they can use them more effectively and modify. Especially, we were very busy during the early days of COVID when everything was moved online, and suddenly we had to help these people who had never even wrapped their heads around the school's LMS, the learning management system. Like, you know, you have kids who are in school and you can go and log in and see what their grades are and see all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
That's because the school uses a learning management software.
Uh-huh.
And so obviously colleges do the same. And so a lot of our job is helping faculty effectively use the learning management software that we have on campus. Because a lot of them are not very good at it, number one. And number two, every single one of them sucks. Every learning management software is a piece of garbage. It's just a question of how garbage is it? Because, like,
you know, if I had to guess, I would make a guess that educational learning management systems are very analogous to electronic medical records in that regard, that everyone is an absolute piece of shit, and your job is to find the one that stinks the least.
That is exactly how it works. And then you find one that stinks the least, and then they just go and they screw it all up.
Yeah, they make it stink more.
Yeah, because we moved at University of Iowa, we used to use D2L, Desire to Learn, and we used that when I started until about 2015, 2016, which is when we swapped over to Canvas, which was a big up-and-comer in the mid-2000s, or the mid-2010s. But it was like lean and mean. And so it didn't do a lot, but what it did pretty good in comparison to Blackboard or Moodle or D2L. But the problem is they've had a bunch of adoption and therefore a whole lot of feature creep.
Oh, yeah.
So there's just a whole lot of like pointless shit that no one will ever use and nobody uses. Like there's a whole system built into the learning management software that I was the only person on campus that was using on the entire University of Iowa campus. And so when I found out it was there and I wanted to learn how to use it, I reached out to IT and I was like, how do I use this? And they were like, we have no freaking idea. Like, no one's ever clicked this before. So go to and I guess tell us how it works. So that's how that goes. So that's what I do during the school years. I do a lot of that kind of stuff. And I also am jointly appointed in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. So I do a lot of work with the Gen Ed program for that as well. Like I'm the person who creates all of the syllabi, creates the calendars, creates the sites in the LMS. I do the oral proficiency interviews for students to help them with placement, all that sort of stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, and then during the summer, obviously there's like 3 classes going, not hundreds. So
right.
I have projects I'm working on. I have to learn how to do Python for a project that I'm working on. And I'm making a bunch of grammar videos for the Open Educational Resource textbook that I am in the process of writing with some of my colleagues at some of the institutions here at Iowa. So that's what I'm doing.
Cool.
Writing a textbook so that we don't charge our students hundreds of dollars for a crappy textbook. We're going to make it totally free, which is exciting. Things like that.
That's awesome. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. Because again, I knew that you worked for the university, but again, I'll admit to ignorance that I didn't know exactly what you did.
Yeah. Well, I keep busy most of the time. Sometimes I get to read at work, which is nice, and I miss that. But here we are.
Excellent. Well, so I know this is your week, and you selected something for us that I'm going to let you introduce. But before we get to that, I want to mention something that I shared with you. So earlier today, I texted you a YouTube video, and it was from a band called Imperial Circus Dead Decadence. So a bit of a mouthful. Now, did you happen to go and look up this album and see the cover art for this album at all? Just
I did not. I watched the video that you sent me, and that was it.
If you happen to go look it up, don't look too closely at the feet, the toes of the character. There's an anime girl on the front. This is a Japanese band. I just have to mention that because the cover is interesting and in some ways kind of hilarious and in some ways kind of cool. And then I saw the toes, and that's all I can see. You can't unsee the toes. Anyway, I read a review. Well,
I have to track it down now.
Well, you got some time while I blabber on here for a minute. I shared this with you, and I just basically said, I'm like, I need you to digest this so we can briefly talk about it. So, it's a Japanese band. They are metal, everything. I mean, you want some black metal, you've got it. You want some death metal, it's there. You want power metal, there's elements of it. Some progressive metal, you betcha. Thrashy riffs, you'll find those in there. Do you want some like grindcore pig squeals? They're in there too. It was a fascinating song. Not one that I actually tried to listen to more of the album, and it was too much for me to make it through more than a couple songs at a time. But I found it fascinating. What did you think about this song that I shared with you? Which I can't name the title of it because the title is a character. And interestingly, this band has even made up their own language. So who knows I certainly don't know if this is a Japanese character, or if this is one of the characters from the language that they invented for their music.
Like CRO style.
Yes. Very interesting. But what were your thoughts when you listened to this?
I know what that character is looking at it. That character is Goku.
Okay.
Is this song about... Is this song about Goku from frickin' Dragon Ball Z?
I have literally no idea. Truly. I couldn't.
I know that I've seen enough Dragon Ball Z in my day to know what that character is. That character is the word Goku.
Well, if you've seen any Dragon Ball Z, you have seen more than I. So
I have not seen that much, but it's such a cultural touchstone of my generation that I know enough that.
Yeah, I think I'm too old for the Dragon Ball Z generation.
Yeah, you're just the late 90s anime insurgents you were a little too old for.
Yep. At that point, I was either getting home from Guatemala or was home from Guatemala and getting married and going to school full time and working 3 jobs, 1 full-time job and 2 part-time jobs. So not a whole lot of anime ingestion for me at that stage of my life. But like I say, what were your thoughts on this song that I asked you to listen to?
It was a lot, just like you said. the best way I could describe it is that it just was a lot.
Yeah.
It was like listening to Devin Townsend, but in Japanese.
Yes, and even maybe a little extra Devin Townsend.
Like Devin Townsend on crack.
Devin Townsend. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So, well, I'm going to say this, and this is revealing something about me. While I have been interested in anime, and when I was a kid, loved Robotech, we used to play with a friend. We would play, Battle of the Planets, which was the American version of another anime. I was really into that stuff, but I don't really remember why, other than I thought, look, anything that had like spaceships and maybe robots that changed shape, I was down for, because that was just the kind of kid I was. But as I've gotten older, I have very, very much struggled. And I think I talked about this a little bit when we talked about Ghost in the Shell.
Yep.
I really have a bit of a hard time with a lot of Japanese entertainment. I don't play Japanese RPG games. I have tried to play a few of them, but I can't really get into them. I've tried to watch some anime. I really struggle to get into it. And listening to this song, I think I understood one of, and probably my principal holdup on some entertainment from Japan. And that is that it is, in many cases, very extra. Just like this song had a little of everything and maybe a little too much of some of those everythings. Fair. I see a lot of that in the things, I remember trying to play Final Fantasy VIII with a friend very early on after we'd been roommates, and then we got married and I was hanging out at his apartment and we were playing Final Fantasy VIII. And I just couldn't keep playing it because, there's silly and then there's extra silly. And I felt like there was a little too much silly for me in Final Fantasy VIII.
Sure.
And I've seen it in a number of other things. And so over the last number of years, that sort of extra nature of things has been a little off-putting to me when I have tried to expose myself to entertainment from Japan.
Uh-huh.
Now, I want to just leave that there, and I'm going to turn it back over to you to introduce what we're going to talk about today, and I will connect the two.
I think I see the through line you're going for, but we'll see. So what we read for today is a comic. So I reached out to Peter. We finished watching X2. He said, "What do you want to do next?" And I was like, "Well, I want to read a comic, but what I really want to read is ElfQuest, but it's like 720 pages." And you were like, "That's a lot. Maybe someday,
for 2
not
weeks.
This time.
Yeah, not
right now."
Quite in 2 weeks.
And to be fair, that's totally understandable. It is a lot. It's however great. It's my favorite American comic of all time. ElfQuest, love it. So then I thought about it and I was like, I'll give Peter a list of options. So I gave you 5 things to choose from. Mm-hmm. I said Black Hole by Charles Burns, which is, this really slow burn comic that's basically an allegory for the AIDS pandemic in the 80s and 90s, where these kids get an STD that makes them essentially mutate. And it's a really cool comic. It's really subversive. It's a classic. I said Hellboy Seed of Destruction, the first big Hellboy story. Also, one of those ones where you read it and you're like, yo, from the beginning, Mignola knew exactly what he was going to do with Hellboy, and he nailed it. And All-Star Superman was the third one I mentioned because I figured I'd throw a superhero one in there. Again, I'm not a big Superman fan, but that is one of the great superhero stories, one of the great Superman books ever. And then I mentioned 2 Japanese comics because I wanted to, we'd read a French comic near the beginning of the podcast. And so I mentioned Helter Skelter by Kyoko Akazaki, which is the one that I suggest to people if they're like, I want to try reading a Japanese comic. And if they're an adult, then I say read Helter Skelter because it's a really great body horror comic that's not too visceral. It's not like looking like at a Junji Ito book because I love Junji Ito, but I wouldn't suggest him to anyone who's not like a big horror aficionado. But Helter Skelter, I feel comfortable introducing to people. But then the last one I mentioned is the one that we decided on today. I mentioned the first volume of Kaoru Mori's A Bride Story, and I think I said, gun to my head, this is my favorite comic of all time.
You did.
And so you said...
And that was what intrigued me.
Yeah, and so you said, well, if this is your favorite, let's do it. And so that's what we decided to read, was the first volume, the first collected volume, the first 5 chapters, essentially, of A Bride's Story, which, like I mentioned, is by Kaoru Mori. She is a mangaka from Japan who has done a lot of period pieces. Almost all of her work is period piece stuff. She did one on, it was called Shirley, which I've never read. I don't know anything about it. But the second book that she did that was her, Shirley I think is 1 volume is all. But Emma was a story set in Victorian England about a maid who falls in love with like an upper class bourgeois man, which, I haven't had a chance to read yet because it's out of print, unfortunately, but I'd really like to. But, it was interesting that she did this thing in Victorian Britain. And then for her second big series, she did A Bride Story, which is about people in Central Asia. This one specifically takes place kind of at the border of the Caspian Sea, so, Turkey. And as the story moves on, you see various and sundry other cultures in Central Asia. But this one specifically takes place, in this village on the Caspian Sea, and stars Amir, who is the bride, the titular bride of the Bride Story, and Karluk, who is her husband. So before we talk about the events of the book, and to put a little more emphasis on what it is, Amir is an old bride. She's 20. She's older than most women get married in this culture. And Karluk, he's a boy. He's 12. So he's younger than most men especially get married in this culture. And they're from different cultures, different like subcultures within their culture. She comes from like a more nomadic people who live out more in the wilderness, whereas he comes from a culture that's a little more settled, a little more, agrarian rather than foraging. And so there's a lot of like cultural exchange that kind of happens between them and that sort of stuff. But basically that's what this first volume is. It's telling the early days of Amir and Karluk's marriage, their family, especially Karluk's family that Amir joins by marrying him, and sets up some long-term situations that we see in later volumes, but is pretty well contained in and of itself.
I would agree.
So what did you think about this book that I presented to you, Peter?
I thought that this was absolutely and utterly delightful and charming. I loved it. I read it in a single sitting because once I started, I was like, I'm not stopping until I am done with this because it was absolutely captivating. And to tie it back to the song that I mentioned earlier. This was so beautifully and artfully restrained.
Yeah.
It is a lovely little story. The drama in this book comes from the normal human interactions that felt so real and so understandable. There was no sitcom-y bullcrap misunderstanding, and that's where the tension comes from. The characters, I loved every single one of them. They were just, again, delightful is the best word I can use for this. And the reason I believe that I found it so completely charming and engrossing, amongst many other reasons, because this is, in my opinion, an absolute work of art and a triumph of comic books. I will say that. And now the caveat being, I have much less exposure to that than certainly you and a lot of other people. But in my experience, this was absolutely fantastic. And it was that restraint, that just so real sense about these characters. You're reading this story and it was utterly believable that everything in here would have happened in the way it happened. There was never anything where I felt like, well, that's just here to, to get us more engaged, but it feels like a bit of a cheap switcheroo because that wouldn't have really happened or anything like that. I mean, it just, I know I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but holy cow, like, so just, like I say, charming and delightful and captivating are really the best words that I can use for it. And so much of that for me was in that real feeling and the restraint of, we're looking at, I mean, because of that restraint, they just felt like real characters who very, very possibly could have existed, and that this is what would have really happened to them. And it wasn't over the top. It wasn't too much. It was just wonderful. So I'll stop talking for a few minutes.
Okay, so here's the thing. I think that there is a reason why you felt that way about it, and I think there's a reason why this book came along this way, especially in comparison to your other exposure to Japanese media here in the States. The situation, I won't call it a problem, even though I often see it as a problem, but it is a situation. The situation is that the vast majority of what gets ported over here is either for kids, Pokemon, Dragon Ball, Yu-Gi-Oh!, or for teen boys. And that is the specific audience that they are catering to. This is shonen manga, shonen anime. Shonen means teen boy. And so the vast majority, nearly any anime, manga, JRPG that you can name, the primary demographic they're going for is teen boys.
I can 100% see that.
Therefore, you get all of the sorts of things that they think will entice a teen boy. You get fan service. This is why fan service is such a thing in anime and manga. That's why you get, beach episodes where everyone gets to wear skimpy outfits, or there'll be like unnecessary and pointless nudity, or there'll be like panty shots, or there'll be, like all of those sorts of things that I think have become hallmarks of anime and manga here in the States are that because they're coming from shonen. That is obviously that's not who Mori's audience is here. Mori's
and
audience,
that's not who I am anymore, which is probably why that stuff just doesn't really do much for me, because I'm an old man.
Exactly. And for me as well. Like the vast majority of the manga that I read, of the Japanese comics that I read, is for a female audience. Whether it is shoujo, which means for teen girls, like your Sailor Moon, or a lot of other ones in that genre, magical girl books like that. Those are all basically, Magic Knight Rayearth, which is one of my all-time favorite comics. That's a shoujo comic. But this book specifically, you can tell this is written for an adult audience. This is not written for teens. And, because like there is nudity in this book, but it is not for titillation. It's not for titillation. It is for it is totally understandable in the situation they're in. She's in a yurt. She has been in a yurt before. Her husband has never been in a yurt before, and she's like, "It's cold. You sleep naked in a yurt, or you freeze."
Yeah.
And he's like, "What?" And she's like, "Get naked, bro. Like, we're in a yurt. This is how you sleep in a yurt." And so again, it's just not titillating. And that stays mostly true.
It was never meant to be anything like that. I mean, it was so obvious, and again, refreshing that it was there because it was real for the story that was being told.
Yes. And even I will say, in later volumes, and specifically volume 7, there is a lot of nudity because one of the characters goes to the bathhouses. So all of the women are topless in the bathhouses. Sure. But again, it is not for titillation. And when it is done to be like, look how beautiful this woman is, it's not like, check out those bazongas. Like, it is a more holistic and realistic portrayal of a human as a human. And I really appreciate that about this work, that, like you said, these feel like genuine people. These are characters who you come to care about and who really resonate as believable, well-rounded. And even though there's not a whole lot of dialogue, I don't know if you noticed how quiet this comic is compared to other comics.
Oh, very much so.
There are whole pages.
And I appreciated that because the nice thing about that is when there's so much text, I find myself just cruising, reading word after word after word after word. And because there was, again, what seemed to be a very deliberate restraint in how much text is being put on the pages, I was able to truly appreciate and take some time looking at the breathtaking art in this book. Because the art is just so far above and beyond what you generally see, at least what I generally see. It's gorgeous.
Oh, it's astonishing. It is astonishing how detailed and intricate. I mean, the very first panel is Amir on their wedding day pulling off this veil that is this immensely intricately designed piece of clothing, wearing these enormous earrings with dangly bits and this huge necklace, and everything is textured. Everything feels like it has depth and like is embodied on the page. And that sets a stage that never stops. There's never a point where you're like, oh, well, that was the splash page to get people interested, and then her art got sloppier as the book went on.
Nope.
It maintains that level of intricacy and attention to detail throughout, so far, 13 volumes. And if anything, it only gets more. If anything, that attention to detail and that intricate nature of her artwork improves as she goes on, as she captures who these characters are more, as she expands the cast considerably, because eventually this becomes many brides stories that we see. As specifically what happens is, if you noticed, he's not very much in this book. Mr. Smith, the white guy who's there like as an anthropologist, you will follow his journeys as he has to venture forth to try to get in contact with a fellow who knows his family and get a message to his family. And so he goes from like culture to culture, town to town, and you are basically taken on a tour of the 19th century Central Asian world and introduced to all of these different cultures and all these different ways that these cultures interact with each other and within themselves. And that lens is often, young brides as your protagonists in each of these, in these cultures. And it's just masterfully done. It's just a heck of a comic.
Yeah, I loved it.
I mean, I had heard about it for years, but I had never picked it up. It was one of those ones that it's one of those ones that you hear people talk a lot about being really intricate and really gorgeous, but I only know one person who's ever said it's their all-time favorite. But I trusted that person, and I was like, well, if this person says it's their all-time favorite, I bet it's pretty good. And it has become mine as well. It is just, I don't know how to say it. The tension that is built on the page. There's so much told through body language and action and panel structure and the wordless way that you intuit what people are thinking. Like, one of the things that stuck out to me most in this reread is the ways that it will hang on panels where Amir and Karluk are looking at each other, and especially when their eyes meet. And there's so much information, like, transmitted between them and you as the reader in the way that they look at each other. And the way that you see their, like, fondness for each other, even though this was an arranged marriage and she's too old and he's too young, you see the way in which their affection for each other grows over the course of the book. And to finally end, you know, I don't even think this is a spoiler because this is just a book about people living lives. The book ends with Karluk getting a cold and getting pretty sick, getting a pretty nasty fever and a cough. And Amir is just like heartbroken and crestfallen and absolutely obsessed.
With fear.
Yeah. Terrified that her husband is going to die, and, you know, makes herself almost sick trying to take care of him because of how that love between the two of them grows. Even though it is, you know, it is a very young love and is a very chaste love, because it's not like they're consummating the relationship because he's 12. And so, like, but there is that, like, love that builds between them over the course. And again, that continues over the course of the book. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a lot.
Yeah, very much. Like I say, I didn't have really any, I didn't have any expectations going in because I didn't know what to expect. I had never heard of it before the text you sent me. And while obviously you spoke highly of it, I didn't know how well that would translate to how I would feel about it. Because,
well, you know, look, I also spoke very highly of Ghost in the Shell, and I'm like, this is one of my top 5 favorite movies, and you're like, it was fine.
Yeah. Well, honestly, one of the motivations for me, at least, behind this podcast is that while many, many years ago, as often happens, we shared very similar likes and dislikes, as we have both become adults, those have diverged in many ways. And I wanted to talk about those things that maybe we feel really strongly about that the other person isn't familiar with. And so, you know, I didn't go into this going, oh, well, if Eden says this is their very favorite, you know, gun to their head, their very favorite comic of all time, I'm clearly going to love it. I went in going, I have absolutely no idea what this is even going to be like. So let's start at square one and let's go from there. And like I said, I could not stop reading. I had to read the entire thing in a single sitting, and then had to physically remove myself from an electronic device that would have allowed me to go, because I don't do physical for very much stuff anymore, and just proceed to buy the remaining 12 volumes, because I was like, I want them all, and I want them all now, but that's kind of expensive to buy all of them just immediately. So I'm going to make myself stop. So
well,
that was kind of
to
where
be fair,
I ended it. So
to be fair, the same sort of thing happened to me, because I only read this book for the first time in December. I bought the first volume. I bought the first volume in December, and I read it in one sitting, and I said, okay. And then I bought volumes 2 and 3 to be shipped to me in 2 days, and I read both of them in one sitting, and then I said, okay, and I bought 4 through 6, and then I read them in like one day, and then I bought 7 through 12 in one sitting. And I spaced them out once 6 books showed up all at once. But like,
Good
the
for
fact
you.
of the matter is, it is written in such a way that it is an absolute page turner, while not being, like you said, because of the detail, because of the quiet in the paneling, because of those moments of silence. It's not like you are speed reading this thing. It's not like you're like, brrr, and turning pages as fast as you can. You are immersing yourself into this image, into this drama that is happening between these people, and you feel that pull, I feel like, as a reader, to find out, what is going to happen here, without it feeling like a cheap, like it's not like a cheap plot hook way that keeps you reading, that keeps you turning the pages, because there's not a whole lot of plot here.
Yeah, and it was never salacious or sensationalistic in any way.
Nope.
But
it
at the
just
same
tells
time,
a story,
incredibly compelling.
Yeah, it just tells a very warm, very human story in a way that draws you in and makes you want more and more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I'm kind of gushing, and that's okay, because I think this deserves to be gushed over. Really.
Agreed.
There were a few things, and I don't know, and I'll leave this up to you if you want to go through the plot, or again,
I think we could if you wanted to, or if you just wanted to touch on specific things that you that really called your attention.
There's a part of me that almost doesn't want to go beat by beat through the plot for two reasons. Number one, because I think if anybody's listening to this, they owe it to themselves to go and read it on their own. And it's not like there's big twists or anything that we're going to spoil, but it's a story that one should experience for themselves. And so I almost want to let anybody who might listen to this and go, that sounds interesting. These two people really enjoyed it. I want to experience it. I want them to experience it almost how I did, going in with, I don't know what I'm going to get here. I don't know. I mean, is this, I didn't know, like, what was the time period? Is this supernatural? Is this whatever? I just didn't know. And I kind of want people to go in almost how am I trying to put it? I don't know, with as kind of an open mind as they possibly can have. The other reason that I don't know that we need to go through it is because while the story was interesting and the story, I felt compelled to read it, it was much less because of the story itself, and it was because I felt so invested in the people who are experiencing the story. The stories, it's just, like you said, it's this 12-year-old and this 20-year-old who are in this arranged marriage, and they're pretty much living with his, and again, I apologize, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I know that you've said it a few times. Thank you. But they're with his family and in kind of the town that, he's from, and it's just these little beats. I mean, I was going back and rereading it, and they're getting ready to have dinner, and Amir's just like, well, I make this soup out of rabbits. And they're like, what? Rabbits? And she's just like, yeah, I'll go get some rabbits. And it was just such an engaging little scenario where she goes out and she's hunting for rabbits, and she had to go a little farther than she thought. And so now you've got her husband who, he's worried because she's been gone. And, one of the old guys in the family's like, whoa, didn't they see wolves there? And so what does he do? He goes out chasing after her, even though he's only 12, because he cares about her and he wants to make sure she's okay. Nothing about the going and getting rabbits, which she, by the time he finds her, she's already got a handful of them that she's killed from, she's taken down with a bow from horseback, and everybody's like, what? She's awesome. But it was just, like you said, the way that art shows these two kind of looking at each other, and the expressions on Karlik's face when he sees her and he sees that she's safe, and the joy she expresses that is expressed on her face when she realizes that he was worried about her and he came to find her. It's just like, I don't know. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's just a stellar piece of art. You know, this is one of those things that, like, comics are art, and I'm the first person to say comics are art, but they're also consumed more like literature than they are consumed like art. Because they are art that specifically and explicitly, well, 99% of the time, there are art comics that definitely don't have a story, but that's not what we're talking about here. This is, and comics is its own thing in that it is not literature. I don't know if you heard about that whole kerfuffle a week or two ago where, like, how familiar are you with Webtoons? Do you know what Webtoons is?
A little bit. I mean, it's one of those things that I'm like, yeah, I kind of know about that, but I'm not super familiar.
Yeah, so it's basically a portal that webcomics are hosted on. You know, in the early days of webcomics, it was the Wild Wild West. Everybody had their own website that they, you know, set up in WordPress or whatever the heck. And it's since been really kind of funneled into a couple of really big publishers, and then some people who still do publish their webcomics on their personal websites. But Webtoons and Tapas are the two big like webcomic distribution services. And Webtoons specifically has more readers than God. Like millions upon hundreds of millions of people go to Webtoons literally every single day. And so it's huge. Like DC has some Webtoons original Batman comics that they publish on Webtoons. So like this has clearly broken through. But they had an ad that was like in the New York City subways or something that was like comics or literature's side hustle. And it was really interesting to see the way that people in comics reacted to that. Because a lot of them, and the ones who I specifically do not agree with, were like, comics aren't literature's side hustle. Comics are literature. And so they were on their, you know, high horse about how comics are literature and that they should be respected on the same level as literature. And while that latter thing is true, the former is not true. Literature is literature. Prose is a prose. And that's not the same as a comic. A comic is the fusion of art and writing into a different medium. And so that's what comics can do that you can't get out of a book, that you can only get in a visual medium. Those long looks between Karluk and Amir, that panel where, you know, Amir or Karluk's sister has given Amir this really beautiful cloth at the start when they first get married, and Amir uses it to make Karluk some like traditional style clothes of where she's from, and it's beautiful, and she puts it on him, and then they're like, oh, his sister's like, oh, you used the cloth to make Karluk clothes. I thought you were going to use it to make yourself clothes. And the embarrassment that she has when she realizes that she thinks that she has made this huge error and has mortally offended her sister-in-law. And like that panel is so emotive, and you can't get that in literature. Like it's not the same when you
describe that in a way that would create that same visceral feeling of empathy that you have for Amir when you look at those at the artwork. You just like, there is no way words would convey that in the same way that you just all of a sudden, like, I remember getting that almost cold feeling in the pit of my stomach where I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen?
And that's the best part. Nothing happens because this is just people. It's just people living their lives. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It doesn't have to be a conflict that goes on for 100 pages. No, it's just funny. She comes out and she takes off all her clothes and she's like, I'm a mess. I'm so sorry. And they're like, just calm down. Chill. Just chill. It's fine. Yeah. And like, that is what, and I think this is one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite comics. It is a perfect example of what comics can do that no other medium can. Because in cinema, you can show the person blushing, but you can't sit with that feeling the way that you talked about, with that feeling in the pit of your stomach, looking at it, being scared to turn the page because you don't know
it has to move
what's
on.
going to happen next.
They've got to move to the next scene. Whereas here, you're in control of when you move to the next scene.
The director chooses the pacing. Exactly. And that is the difference in visual medium between comics and cinema. Cinema, TV, film, whatever, the director chooses the pace. I don't choose the pace. I'm just along for the ride. But and this is one of the things that's so powerful about reading comics, you as the reader get to set the pace. You get to set, how long do I sit with scenes? How long do I sit with a frame? How long do I sit and look at this beautiful, 2-page spread of them herding sheep? How long do I look at how the little differences between each of the sheep that Mori draws into this huge panel? Like, I choose how long I look at that. And I choose how much or how little I want to invest in that. And that is the thing that comics can do that no other medium can. And it's one of the reasons why I chose to study comics, is because of that ability that comics has that nothing else does. And I just think I just get jazzed up about it. I just think it's so cool that in a way that no other medium does, the only other medium that involves you as the spectator as fully, and probably more so, is video games. Which is one of the reasons why I think I like video games so much. Because video games involve you taking the place of the protagonist. You are embodying physically the main character of this game. You are Commander Shepard. And the choices that you make as Commander Shepard have ramifications, both in that game and in the games to come. Yeah. Just to pick, one that I know that you and I both like.
I was just going to say, I love that you chose that, only because a couple of weeks ago I happened to be talking about it with my wife and my kids. I think maybe my youngest was the only one around. And I mentioned how it's the only series of video games. I mean, I don't play games more than once usually. And I've played through the entire trilogy 4 times. And I remember my wife asking me, she's like, why would you play through the game again? And I turned to her and I said, have you ever read a book more than once? Oh, yeah. I said, have you ever watched a movie or a TV show more than once? She's like, yeah. I said, okay, now do that where you are the one in complete control of what happens in the story, when it happens, and how it goes. And all of a sudden she kind of went, oh, okay. She doesn't get it. She's not going to go and play Mass Effect. But I think she understood that idea that you're engaging in something that you find so engrossing and enjoyable, and you are more invested in it because you have, at least to some degree, control over that experience. It is,
for sure,
it is more of an active consumption of the story than it is a passive consumption of the story.
Well, and like you said, the nice thing is you can make different choices. Who am I going to make Commander Shepard kiss this time? Will it be Liara? Will it be Garrus? Will it be Samantha Trainer? Who's to guess? It'll be Liara, because that's the best romance in the whole series. But believe me, I played it more than 4 times, friends. Liara is the best one. Samantha Trainer's pretty cute, though, too, in a Mass Effect 3. If you have a nice, chaste and or willing to break up with her partner's Commander Shepard, the Samantha Trainer romance in 3, pretty good.
I can believe that would be a cute little, I don't know, just, again, delightful was the word I was thinking.
Part of it's just that I love that voice actress.
She does great.
And which is why every time you play Dragon Age Inquisition, you also play as a female Inquisitor, so you can have her be your OC. But back to comics.
Back to comics. There are a couple
But comics
things...
can involve you like that. That's what's so great about it. Anyway, what did you want to say?
Well, I was going to say there's just a couple things, if you'll indulge me, that I want to talk about here.
Of course.
Amir's family is wonderful. They're great.
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
All of them, from old to young. I loved the kids. The kids were so excited about everything, even the things that weren't exciting, but they were excited because she's new. She's a different person. I've had kids. I still have kids. And when they were young, it didn't matter who came over to the house or what they were there for. The kids were going to go and show off because it was somebody new. And I could see that. It was just happening with these children in Amir's family. And it was delightful. And like you said with the, I think it's his older sister who gives that fabric, correct?
Uh-huh. Yep.
it sets up this thing that could be this big, oh no, this is going to be the tension of the next 25 minutes or whatever, 22 minutes of this episode. And no, it's just immediately moved aside. And it's like, no, it's okay. It was, I mean, we gave it to you. You could do whatever you want with it. And they're just, the way they accept her in and treat the two of them. I was a little worried when I started that it was going to be, kind of that wah awkward. Oh boy, we've got this old bride with us that we've been strapped with, and we sure don't. But no, there's none of that. They like her. They accept her. His family I loved everything about them.
Yeah.
And again, like you said, the relationship between Karlik and Amir, it was only, 2-3 pages in, and I was totally bought into it. Like, I believed it. And I believed that while there was this age difference and while he is quite young, there was an absolute, genuine love and affection between the two of them that never let up and only grew and developed over the course of the story.
Yeah. It's just, it's a love story that is aching in its honesty. And like, it doesn't feel superficial. It doesn't feel contrived. It feels genuine and real in a way that I feel, at least in the media that I consume, is not very common.
I don't think it's very common in media, period, which I think that's this
true
was
too.
Such a standout and such a stellar read.
And it keeps doing it. That's the thing, that take your time reading them, space them out, but read all 13 volumes that are out. It's so good, and it stays good. And it introduces so many other characters who you come to love just as much as you love Amir and Karlik. And you'll spend entire volumes where you don't even see them, or if you do, it's only for like a couple of pages, because it's off with these new people who you meet, who you come to love just as much, because they are, portrayed in that same level of authenticity and realness and a feeling of being caught intimately and being just, I don't know how to describe it, but it captures me as a reader. It just really does. It's just something else. I just love this book.
No, it was great. I am so happy that you suggested it and that we read it. And, hopefully anyone who's listening to this, I would just say, give it a shot. It may not be for you, and that's okay. But it is absolutely 100% worth giving it a shot and experiencing it and seeing what you think about it. It was just, again, delightful was the word that I could not stop thinking of as I read it and as I finished it and as I came back to read it again.
Yeah, this is one of those comics, like, my wife likes comics, but she doesn't read a lot of comics. She mostly reads prose novels. And that's fine. We read you don't have to have the same tastes as your partner. That would be boring and weird, I think.
Sure.
But every so often there's a thing where you're like, yo, you got to check this out. And I remember the day that I read this, I remember texting Cassie and just being like, girl, you got to read this. This is so good. And I don't think she has yet, but this has rekindled my need to convince her to read this series.
Well, like I say, I don't know if it would influence her decision at all, but I would say that, let her know that this is not what I would have expected to love, and I absolutely loved it.
Well, see, this is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that I have imparted to you one of the great works of comics in the 21st century, and a curse in that most everything else you read after this, you're going to be like, that was good, but it wasn't Bride's Story good.
I've actually kind of accepted that.
That's good.
That's going to be okay. I don't expect this to be. I don't know. I don't expect this to be something that is oh yeah, everything's going to be like this.
Good. I will say that I know that a lot of the people who like this book say that the book, I can't think of the name of the author. I'm going to look it up really quick. There is a or a comic series called Witch Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirahama, which has art that when I pick up that book for the first time, I looked at it and I thought, oh, this is Bride Story style art. Like, it is that level of really carefully imagined and really detailed and really intricate. And I've heard nothing but good things about Witch Hat Atelier, but I haven't read it yet. I have the first 2 volumes, but I haven't gotten around to it. But reading this again made me think, I think it's time to finally do Witch Hat and see if it's as good as everybody says. Because a lot of the people who even really love Bride Story say that Witch Hat Atelier is even better. So I don't know whether that'll convince me, because nothing has thus far. But I'll let you know. I'll let you know how Witch Hat is after I read a couple of volumes of it.
That sounds good.
All right. Well, we should wrap it up. In ending, I just do want to give a birthday shout out. I know it's not on the day that this episode comes out, but the day that we're recording, it's birthday shout out to Octavia Butler, one of the greatest sci-fi authors of all time. Rest in peace, Octavia. You were a real one. Have you ever read any Octavia Butler?
I have, and I'm trying to remember what series it was I read. But it was fascinating. It's a very different style than what I was used to, but no, it was very good. The whole time I was reading it, I'm like, okay, I get why she's considered a real pinnacle of science fiction.
For sure. Parable of the Sower is one of the most terrifying books I've ever read, because I read it in the lead up to the 2016 elections, and there's a politician in Parable of the Sower whose slogan is "Making America Great Again."
Oh, cool.
So as I read Parable of the Sower, I thought, oh, so this is what's going to happen. And in 2022, I feel all the more thinking about Parable of the Sower. Oh, so this is going to happen. So it's an apocalyptic novel that is pretty brutal in its depiction of how the society falls apart, but also how society is built back. And maybe that's what we should focus on. Anyway, we should wrap it up. I'm glad you enjoyed the book so much. It's just good. It's just really good.
It was great.
And we will be back in 2 weeks. We will be continuing the Summer of X with the much maligned Brett Ratner film, X-Men 3: The Last Stand.
Yep, we sure will.
Brett Ratner, famous lover of booties. Brett Ratner.
Oh boy. I
will have to have a tally of all of the booty shots.
Well, I have to remind myself that I was the one who came up with this idea. So
it is your fault.
Yes, it is. It is my fault. I am to blame. And so any psychological trauma that occurs from us watching X3, The Last Stand, that's on me. That is on me.
Well, that's okay. I am ready to stare down that train tunnel with you and watch that train approach that is X3, The Last Stand.
I appreciate that. Like we said a couple weeks ago, I don't look forward to watching it, but I do look forward to talking about it.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. As we always say, subscribe in your podcatcher of choice. Leave a review if you feel so inclined. That would be great. It would make my heart grow 3 sizes. And if you need to get in touch with us, what is the email address?
It is feedback@themiddleofculture.com.
That's so good. Do you know what URL I bought the other day that I'm starting to use as my main URL? Horsedivorce.club.
Yes, that is
Horsedivorce.club.
URL.
I bought it. It's great. That's my new email address. I finally got it all set up.
That is excellent.
It's exciting stuff. Anyway, thanks all for listening. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. And until then, take care.
Absolutely. Bye.